Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, the Shah of the Princeton Bar, Jack Slack. And it's Monday the 7th of April. No, May. Shit. Time's slipping by as faster than I can keep up with it. And we've got a lot to catch up on because I haven't done one of these in a little while. I'm doing badly on keeping up. But we're doing this one today, and then we'll do previews on both the Bellator and the UFC show Wednesday, Thursday. If I aim for that, then we'll definitely have them done on Friday. But yeah, a little bit to catch up on. We got a Bellator event that I did watch but didn't cover, and we got a Rizin event which I have just finished watching now, though I watched the latter half of it on the day, because the wonderful thing about Rizin, and one of the reasons that I'll always support them, is that their events are on a Sunday afternoon in England. Well, Sunday late morning. So what you do is you get yourself a nice croissant, throw that in the oven, get a cup of tea on, get the stream on, the totally legal stream, and then you swig your tea with a croissant and maybe a cheeky smear of Nutella if you're very lucky. Which is like nutritional cancer. It's probably the worst thing you can ever eat. But it's also God's way of balancing things out. They said, Jack has way too many talents and good looks. What can we do? Oh, we'll make him addicted to palm oil with sugar and cocoa in. But yeah, the Rizin event was pretty good. I'm sort of torn because it wasn't as good as some of the ones I remember enjoying. I think it mainly the letdown of the main event, to be honest. If you're Rizin, like, that is sort of like when you make a wish with the devil or a deal with the devil or something like that. You know, the wording very specifically lets you down. Like, the best thing they could have hoped for was for Kyoji to come out and smash Ian McCall and do it convincingly and quickly. But what happened was he hit him with the first punch, Ian McCall flopped down, went turtle, and the referee immediately jumped on him. And Ian McCall afterwards was like, no, I was fine. Even though he wasn't fine, and I'm sure Kyoji probably would have hit him like 3 more times, and that would have been a much more convincing stoppage. But the way that the stoppage went down made it seem not as decisive as it should be. And now you can't sell a rematch of this based on the shit stoppage. It's not Ken Shamrock versus Tito Ortiz. It's tricky, because this was the one they were building up to for quite a long time. You know, they put them both in the same tournament, hoping that they'd meet up eventually, and then because Ian McCall is cursed, pissed off an old gypsy woman at some point in his past, he got his face sliced open by a ring rope. And, you know, I'm always on about how bad the ring is, and we will talk about how bad the ring is further on when we're talking about this event, but I've never seen it slice a guy's face open on, like, the first time his face touched it. So yeah, that was a really bit of a letdown, to be honest, because Kyoji Horiguchi is head and shoulders above the rest of the talent in Rizin. I mean, I'd like to see him fight, what's his name, Asakura, the guy who beat Cape just recently, but that's not a particularly compelling fight. Was talking to various people about things they could do with Kyoji after this. My boy Rogue Synth on Twitter, he was suggesting a couple of the Shuto champions. I think it was the Shuto Flyweight and Shuto Bantamweight champion, both of whom Horiguchi has fought before. And the problem with, like, Shuto champion doesn't mean everything that people pretend it means. Shuto is, yeah, I mean, back in the day when other companies didn't have lightweight divisions, Shuto was the shit. But, and the belts do have a great lineage. You know, you've got people like Gomi and Kawajiri, Kid Yamamoto coming through there with belts, but also you've got heaps and heaps of guys who just didn't amount to much. And the thing about Shuto is the home of the draw, legendarily, and the home of the decision. The two lads that my pal was recommending for a shot at Kyoji, they have, since they fought Kyoji, they have a combined 22 fights and a combined 6 finishes in those 22 fights. So selling it is going to be difficult, aside from the personal angle, but they've beaten no one that would put them as a compelling matchup for Kyoji Horiguchi. And if you want to, you know, a look into what the Shuto Championship really means, the guy who fought Darren Cruikshank is the current Shuto champion in their 70 kilo division, and he was hopeless. He did nothing that entire fight. Didn't cut the ring, just followed Darren Cruikshank around, getting kicked. So, I mean, that's like the likely outcome. He'll fight some jabronis, just to fill up their cards, and then maybe they'll put together another Grand Prix. They could put together a flyweight Grand Prix if they can find enough flyweights. In terms of, like, cross-promote, the problem with cross-promotion generally is that promoters will do it, but it tends to be to get eyes on one of their guys who they already want to get, they want to get some attention or some experience. So sending King Mo over to Japan to fight nobodies, that's fine. Sending Krokop to Bellator to get some eyes on the event, that's fine. But when you're talking about like Rory McDonald versus Ben Askren, or back in the day it was Gilbert Melendez versus Eddie Alvarez, I think, when Eddie Alvarez was Bellator champion and Strikeforce was still going, and Melendez was their champion. There was all sorts of talk about that fight, and as far as I can remember, there's never been like a big promotional B-tier promotion. Maybe it's happened in like C-tier promotions, but B-tier promotions in MMA just under the UFC, I've never seen a champion versus champion fight as far as I can recall. I mean, I'm struggling to think of some, but if you can, let me know, because it's always the one that we all talk about. Like, once you get out of the UFC, the possibilities are endless. You can fight all these guys. But really, when you're talking about guys' top talents, they're a lot more reluctant to let them go and fight elsewhere. We saw it, like how hard Bellator tried to keep hold of Eddie Alvarez, how hard World Series of Fighting, I was going to say World Series of Fraud. No, World Series of Fighting tried to keep a hold of Justin Gaethje. If you've got someone who's legitimately like in the running for top 10 of that division worldwide, and everyone's saying, well, they could have a go of it in the UFC, they might have a case for being the best fighter in the world, like Michael Chandler. They're never going to send Michael Chandler over to fight, I don't know, Rizin doesn't have a lightweight champion, so they're never going to send him to fight like the one lightweight champion or something like that in one. Though the one lightweight champion is probably just some guy from Evolve who beats up lots of scrubs. I can't recall who is. Yeah, so it's tricky. Like, the world is supposed to open up when you're outside the UFC and a free agent, but it doesn't. Possibly John Dodson. I mean, that would be a very good fight. You've got a guy who was a flyweight and now a bantamweight like Kyoji. And he was ranked top 10 in the world, and it was a bit of a baffling one that the UFC have allowed him to fight out his contract and not re-signed him. I presume he will re-sign at some point in the future when he revises his demands, but if he went to Rizin and had the fight with Kyoji, that would be fantastic. The other options are people like Darien Caldwell, the current Bellator champion, I believe bantamweight champion. Someone said Bibiano Fernandez. Bibiano sort of dropped off my radar when he went to fight for One, because I used to watch him all the time in Japanese promotions. But if you don't know who he is, he's firstly a great fighter, but also like Demetrius Johnson's main training partner. So very much legit. But yeah, that was that, the main event. Manal Cape versus Asakura, or whoever it was. That was a good fun fight. And Yachi versus Nunez was also awesome. Kana Asakura beat some lass who was 3-3, and a taekwondo fighter apparently. Tenshin smashed some lad in a kickboxing bout who wasn't a kickboxer. Darren Cruikshank beat the Shuto 70-kilo champion with a head kick and then flipped him off, which was really out of character with everything else he did in the fight, after the fight, up to the fight. Maybe he's a douchebag, maybe he's embracing the gaijin persona. He did enter to living in America with star-spangled outfit on. Was it the last event or the one before? And then he had some heavyweights laying on each other. There was a nice anaconda choke further down the card, or right at the start of the card, rather. And the anaconda choke was Kanako Murata, who is now 7-1, and she was fighting a lass who was 1-1, so, don't really like that. The event we missed was Bellator 198, which was Fedor versus Mir, and it was the one we had a big rant about, going, what on earth are they doing here? Sam Cecilia in a co-main event. Why not have someone like Michael Chandler, who people are going to care about? The event went off, and because Fedor won, I got tons of people going, ha! Shows you, Jack. It was a great event. And if the fight had also been 30 seconds and Fedor had fallen down, would that still have been a great fight? People are just bizarre, especially super diehard Bellator fans. But, it was two fat old dudes swinging at each other. Frank Mir turned up to the weigh-ins with abs on the front of his belly, which was bizarre. There was a gorgeous throw in there. Let's be fair to Fedor. He hit a lovely. Wasn't Uchimata? Was it? What's the one where you sweep the far leg instead of the near leg for an Uchimata? It was one of those with Frank Mir on him along the fence. Really, nothing else to write home about, but it did secure one of them going through to the next round, which is why they have the old guys versus the old guys and the young guys versus the young guys in this tournament, because the old guys bring the actual ticket buys, and the people who are going to win the tournament are not really drawls. As always with Bellator, there were 100 people you've never heard of fighting in the prelims. But the main card, they had Dylan Danis turned up for Kyle Walker. Kyle Walker 2-4. Not a bad first fight for Dylan Danis in terms of opponent. You want someone safely beatable. I mean, they learned from their Aaron Pico mistake there. Dylan Danis, really cool toe hold submission for the win. But clearly a guy who has been training full-time forever versus a guy who had a 2-4 MMA record. Naaman Gracie versus Javier Torres, wherever he's from. I thought this fight was fun. In fact, this event had a couple of extended leg entanglement scrambles, which they've been dominating the submission only scene for a while. It was only going to be, it wasn't going to take long until they started turning up on regular MMA cards. Outside of people like Alvarez, of course, and Imanari. There was a very long leg entanglement that ended. Well, actually, it started about halfway through the first round. It ended in the second. Ended at the end of the first round. But then there was a nice arm triangle for the finish. I was impressed. I like Naaman Gracie. Seems cool. Read a really bad article this week. In fact, it was today. That was just don't try and get under Naaman Gracie's skin. He grew up a Gracie. It's like, what? Top comment was, what? Rich and spoiled. But yeah, fair enough, Naaman Gracie. Rafael Lovato Jr. versus Gerald Harris. Now, I put a cheeky couple of quid on Gerald Harris in this one, because if there's one thing that gets me excited to bet for stuff, and this is how I won money on Diaz McGregor 1, is if someone comes in as a last minute replacement who seems like a significant change up of styles, and 2, vastly underrated by fans in this specific bout, always worth throwing a couple of quid on. I didn't win, obviously, because Rafael Lovato looked really good, but it's always a good way to find odds that don't reflect how you feel the match plays out. Even if the guy loses, he was still better than the odds that were given for him, or had a better chance. But Lovato looked awesome. I didn't realize how much bigger Lovato was until the weigh-ins. I was like, Christ. Lovato's guard looked sick. Double wrist control, which again Danis was using in his fight. We were saying doesn't happen as much in MMA nowadays, but he was using double wrist control, and it was sort of like an open guard with the shin on his opponent's neck, with the knee in front of the shoulder, and then he just sprung up into a triangle with the arm trapped in. Then he started sort of off balancing Harris, and then rolled into the armbar. It was really slick. I think it turned up in BJJ Scout's newest video. Definitely going to be playing with that. And Kent Peters from Zombie Proof BJJ did a great breakdown of it too. Emmanuel Sanchez did what he was supposed to do and beat Sam Cecilia, and he actually got a finish. Way, good man. Yeah, fun enough fight. Standing arm triangle. Couple of those have happened in Bellator now. Marlon Sandro did one, and he might have also got caught in one. I can't remember. Marlon Sandro. Now, there's a name from the past, and it was really sad when McGregor beat Aldo, and there was that clip of Sandro bereft of reason, absolutely bawling his eyes out and covering his face with his hat as it happened. And people were like, Aldo's cornerman freaks out. And you're like, that's Marlon Sandro, you dickhead. He was the number 2 featherweight in the world for quite a while. But anyway, yeah, so that was fun enough. I mean, Sam Cecilia was there to lose for a start, but just why are you putting Sam Cecilia in? Well, to lose, obviously, but this was a Scott Coker card. Lots of finishes, few mismatches on there to make sure there were lots of finishes, and afterwards all the Bellator boys were wanking themselves dry. However, it does set up Fedor versus Chael Sonnen, which will probably be the biggest drawing fight in the company's history. I think they got 1.5 million viewers for this, which is really good, but we expected them to get viewers. I never at any point said they wouldn't get good viewers. My thing was why are you putting Sam Cecilia and Emmanuel Sanchez as the co-main event on a card that's going to get the most viewers ever? Get Michael Chandler on there, or someone else like Darien Caldwell. Caldwell. Unlike my commentary. Actually, just came out today that they've signed Roger Huerta to a quote-unquote long contract. You're just like, why? Why? If you can't pay your Russians and book them fights, why are you hiring... Well, old man name value, obviously, but I don't know how much of that Roger Huerta has left, because he was never as big a deal as they wanted him to be anyway. So that was Bellator 198. I mean, it succeeded in the ways it was supposed to succeed, but it's still... a lot of money they're pumping into these old men. That main event, I can almost guarantee you that between the purses for the two of them and, show money, win money, they paid $1 million or close enough to it. So you're paying $1 million for one fight to get 1 million viewers. It seems like an unsustainable model, but we're going to see. I mean, someone after this was saying, oh my God, this is like that Strikeforce event with all the knockouts, which again had a lot of mismatches on, and that was classic Scott Coker. Matt Linland at the age where he was just falling apart versus Robbie Lawler. You knew exactly what was going to happen. But someone was saying, oh, this is the start of a golden age for Bellator. And someone else pointed out in this discussion, that was also when Strikeforce was circling the drain. They had a few more good events, but they were also hemorrhaging money and not doing anything to sustain it. The other one was like, people just shocked at how little this was advertised, this event. Some people were really disappointed with the numbers. I was impressed, but I suppose it depends on whether you thought this would shatter the 2 million viewers. Mind you, the initial report said it was like 500,000, and I was looking at that going, that would be really bad. But anyway, Bellator stumbles on. I've got no problem with Bellator. I've got no problem. Well, actually, I do have problems with Bellator, but I don't want Bellator to fail for the sake that Bellator fails. I want the awful marketing strategy of just pumping cards full of old men and mismatches to misfire because it's awful. I also just wish that Shinzo Machida would come back and fight again. Oh, anyway, let's move on. Let's do some questions, because I've got a massive pile-up of them in my inbox at the moment. Hey, Jack. I've realised that although karate is used by numerous notable fighters, they don't seem to look similar in terms of fighting style, just like how Darren and Kyoji differ according to your article I wrote in the week. Fighters like Stephen Thompson, Lyoto Machida, and Bobby Knuckles differ a lot in how they do things. Could this be due to being taught in different schools, such as Shotokan and Kempo? Connor also has a Shotokan background, but although people credit his stance and round kicks to this background, I think his left straight also seems to be influenced by it. I feel like he doesn't throw it like a typical boxer. I can't explain it properly, but it's like he moves his arm first and starts twisting his hips near the end of it. Do you also see this? What are the schools of karate and how they differ in terms of technique? Are karate boxers a thing? From Mohammed. Yeah, okay. Karate is one that every time I write an article about it, I have to simplify it. And people get really pissy about it. They're like, I think you'll find Goju-ryu, actually. You make... Anytime you're talking about karate, you're making a massive simplification of many, many styles. Because Taekwondo, Tang Sudo, Hapkido, things like that are all offshoots of karate. Japanese karate, which in itself is offshoots of Okinawan karate, which in itself comes from China, blah, blah, blah. Actually, it's a bit of a shame because I'm quite well read on the history of Okinawa and the history of karate generally. I would love to do a Patreon episode on that, but I don't know if there'd be much interest in it. Though it is, it's an interesting story because Okinawa was famously a weaponless kingdom. And there's, something interesting between the myth and the fact there. Finding the truth of it is fairly fun, and there's also tons of borderline impossible nonsense in there and fairy tale that makes it quite an exciting story. Maybe one day, when people care. So what I tend to do is I break it down by the types of competition. Typically in karate there is points karate, which is like WKF, JKA, Shotokan, Shotokan, Goju-ryu, Wado-ryu, Shito-ryu. They're all, the traditional styles are all going to compete under competition, points style rules. Then you've got knockdown styles, which are Kyokushin and all the offshoots of that. Seido Keikan, Ashihara, fucking everything. But that's a far easier way to break it down than to be like, I think you'll find he's got a Goju-ryu background. Because Gunnar Nelson has a Goju-ryu background, but he fights a lot more like, say, Lyoto Machida or Shinzo Machida, guys with Shotokan backgrounds, than one of the many, many kickboxers who've come from Shotokan, because he fights like an actual points fighting fighter. Because the Goju-ryu, if you compete in Goju-ryu, it'll be under points rules, probably. When you're talking about like Goju-ryu, Shotokan, Wado, blah, 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 you're really just differentiating what kata they do. And how their like traditional training goes, because most of the competition stuff brings everything more in line. They all look very similar, and the criteria for scoring points are the same in these cross-style competitions. But of course, things like Taekwondo and American kickboxing look very different from point fighting as well, because they don't place so much emphasis on landing the reverse punch, which is the standard karate go-to. Regarding Conor McGregor's karate background, that seems to be something that came in with the Showtime commentators. He has a lot of training under guys with Taekwondo backgrounds. They had a very good Taekwondo, I think it was heavyweight, at Straight Blast Gym. And you can watch like young Conor McGregor practicing lead leg kicks going up and down a wall. And there's a lot of Taekwondo influence in his stance and movement and stuff. The Shotogan thing, as someone who's researched him extensively, trying to put together some, a book on him, it's all very mixed. Like the references to him doing karate are all vague, and they seem to come later on in his career. But again, it's quite hard to find information on young Conor McGregor. I get people emailing me being like, I can't find any information on his amateur boxing days, and I have to be like, yeah, because it's all really vague and seems like wishy-washy. Rumours that he won a schoolboy championship, and then like the dates of things move around. Sometimes he was fighting when he was this age, but he hadn't started fighting until he was this age, and it's all very skeptical and up in the air. You'll have to, he'll release his own memoir, I'm sure, with whatever story he wants told in it. But yeah, as far as karate, I don't know. It's certainly your backstepping left hand's going to be tricky to land on good boxers. As you saw, he landed like none on Floyd Mayweather. But I don't know if it's a specifically karate thing. But then you can see Tenshin Nasukawa do the same thing. Generally, like when you're talking traditional styles of karate, you're talking points fighting or knockdown fighting. Knockdown fighting, like Kyokushin guys, they tend to be hard as nails and really good at throwing up high kicks from very short spaces, but not really learn any defense at all. Shotokan guys, points karate guys tend to be good at bursting across long distances, managing that distance, not being hit at all, and then bursting in with the right hand, and then just standing there ready to be hit again. So, like if you watch Karate Combat, which my next question is about, it's just a load of guys bursting in beautifully, landing the right hand, and then getting chinned on the left hook immediately afterwards. And this is the thing, like, generally, I think... Actually, we'll talk about it. I'll take my next question and then I'll mention it again. Hi, Jack. I'm a Patreon boy, eagerly awaiting the Lion's Den episode at the moment. That has gone up now. I'm writing because I watched the Karate Combat event this week online. I got downvoted to hell on Reddit for saying I felt the cinematic camera style and quick cuts were there to hide the fact that it was just shitty kickboxing that adds shitty grappling and ground and pound. I don't see how these rules improve in any way on K1 kickboxing or Muay Thai, both rule sets that I really enjoy. I suspect the real motivation behind the new rule set is to bring back American pajama pants kickboxing. I understand that it was probably the karate contingent out in force downvoting me, and I admit that I don't follow sport karate at all. Don't worry, no one does. It's shit. Still, did I fail to appreciate something about Karate Combat? Or was I right that it's just C-grade kickboxing dressed up with weird camera angles? Thanks, Charles. All right, you got to be careful with this, because I put up a GIF of two guys like standing on one leg, side kicking each other at this event. It was just it was the pre-event stuff, the pre-season stuff, and some guy then said, "Oh, he's just out to tank any promotion that's not the UFC. Wow, the level of striking in Karate Combat was really high otherwise. Wow," and it wasn't. It was shit generally. I've only watched bits of the actual event. But, yeah, the camera angles did seem to be covering for shitty action. It doesn't help when you've got two guys wearing gi pants and black belts and nothing else to differentiate them. I wrote an extended article on this. It's not great, the Karate Combat model. And the thing is that they've brought Bas Rutten in, and Bas Rutten clearly wants it to be more like kickboxing. But he's having to explain to Joe Rogan on the podcast why they're not doing things. Like, you could do a long hook, which is a ridge hand, which is just a shit like swinging spaz swing, or they wouldn't allow you to use a short hook, which is with the front of the fist. And loads of people didn't understand this. Like, I was reading through Reddit comments and people just didn't seem to get what short hook is. Short hook under their rules is front of the fist, i.e. an actual hook that won't break your hand. But as soon as they legalised the hook, the people are just going to get knocked out left, right and centre because they just kept eating these hooks in the aftermath of their right hand. But that's a style thing. That's, competition karate not stopping at the point, basically. Generally, if you saw the pre-season stuff, it all devolved into who could hit a single leg or double leg the quickest, and keep doing it. Because the ground and pound, they'd let you hit, you're supposed to, they kept saying on the commentary 5 seconds, which is a really long time. So, like, Agir was standing over some dude, just blasting him in the head over and over again. Referee steps in and you think, oh, is that a knockout? And he goes, right, back to your feet. So, it's just completely pointless, because none of them know any ground fighting, none of them have guards of any sort. So really, it's just, it doesn't make sense when people are like, it's supposed to look like Karate Jack, because karate doesn't have single and double leg takedowns in competition, and that was all the preseason stuff was. And I watched a few of the actual event matches, and they didn't seem to be tremendously different. The other one is the low kick, because they didn't want to allow the low kick above the knee. They only wanted to allow it below the knee, so it's more like a foot sweep. And foot sweep is a rule that people used to play with fast and loose back in the day. Back in the early 90s, Elwyn Hall was coming through the British karate scene, just punting people in the calf as hard as he could, and be like, "Oh, it's a sweep attempt." Non-contact competition, but I'm going to try and break this guy's leg. So then I think the WKF changed it so that your foot has to be in contact with the floor when it connects, so that you're using the sole of the foot to sweep as opposed to the top of the foot, which is a kick. But they allowed low kicks in the pre-season stuff, and they were really reluctant to allow Thai/kickboxing style kicks on the thigh, which seemed dumb. The problem is that if you put these guys under kickboxing rules, it could be fun. Have it under kickboxing rules. Allow takedowns or don't allow takedowns, but really you're just turning it into Sanshou at the moment. It'd be fun to watch these guys compete under kickboxing rules and have them against other karateka or competition karateka, so that, you're not throwing them in with experienced kickboxers and just having them knocked out. Because that's what people talk about. Like, they want a bridging of the gap, bringing the karate more into line with, or bringing top-level karateka into combat sports. Do it like that. Or like when they used Seido Keikan rules or various, adapted rules to put Andy Hug on K1 cards before he was actually competing as a kickboxer. If you're using it as a transitional thing, that's a great idea. If you're trying to use it as its own event, it's kind of shit as it is. It was very low quality kickboxing with takedowns against people who don't know how to stop a takedown. I mean, if it stays a thing, it might grow and people will learn to defend takedowns and it'll get more complicated. But I feel like it's going to bomb after a few events because these things tend to do that. Might well just be a big money laundering scheme, to be honest, because a lot of fight promotions do seem to be. Dear Jack, thanks for the great articles and podcasts. I, like many others, am constantly refreshing my podcast feed at the start of the week in anticipation of the new episode of Fights Gone By. Thank you for the buttering up. Every now and then we hear discussions of the appropriateness and disadvantages of the cage in MMA, and whether there are any realistic alternatives. The cage has many flaws, with potential for fence grabs, as well as restrictive views. Joe Rogan often talks about the idea of using a basketball court, but that would be unrealistic and also take away from the MMA skills such as wall walking. Similarly, a boxing ring has its disadvantages, with fighters falling through the ropes, for example. I think the solution is obvious: a clear plastic or perspex type screen replacing the fence. A screen would allow for wall walking and also protect fighters from falling through the ring. Finally, visibility would be improved, as the clear screen will allow fans an unobstructed view of the action. Any blood smeared onto the screen will be wiped away in between rounds, and besides that may give Brittany and Ariane something else to do. Any thoughts? Keep up the great work, from Savilo Joe. And then a couple of days later, he also sent a message saying, "Scratch that, it's silly." But I think there is, I think there are ways to do the cage better. I think, we're living in an age where you could make a translucent fencing material, I'm fairly sure. Something that just wasn't as clearly a grain across every image you look at. The ring, I've had so many arguments about, but no one can ever actually bring a good practical answer. People immediately jump on you with, it stops stalling. It doesn't. Watch any of the events from the end of Pride when guys were starting to work on wall walking. They just used the corners, and there was tons of stalling in the clinch along the ropes. They tend to see less of it now because I suspect the quality of the fighters is lower in most ring organizations. But, they have other ones like, you can't... Someone was trying to argue that it was... You can only have soccer kicks and stomps in the ring. It's too dangerous in the cage, which is bollocks, because Cage Rage and 1FC both used kicks and stomps in the cage. They just decided that it was better for the image of the company if they didn't use them. There's nothing like people are using your foot flying out of the ring and you getting caught in the ropes as an advantage, saying that that's a good thing. Someone was trying to imply that by having the ring, by people constantly falling through the ring and having to restart in the center of the ring, that encourages a more active guard because you're constantly being put back in the middle of the ring, which he was like, that's implicitly what they're doing. And I'm like, no, They put it in the rules if they wanted to restart in the center of the ring every time there was a takedown. The fact that they're constantly going through the ropes is the ropes not doing their job. If you watched Rizin this weekend, there were dozens of instances of it. Yachi got his right hook. He drew back for a right hook, got his arm stuck under the rope, and then got hit by the guy he was fighting. Kai Asakura, or whatever his name is, had Manal Cape, and he had the crossface on, but his arm, the string tying the ropes together was caught between his arm and Manal Cape's head. At another point, it was caught against Cape. The rope was caught against Cape's head, and he couldn't move, and he was being pushed through the bottom rope. The ropes are just shit. And then someone was trying to say that it's a cultural thing and pro wrestling and this, that, and the other. No, it's because we used to have boxing in rings and kickboxing in rings, so we started having fights in rings. It's the same. Vale Tudo was doing it before they had the pancrase or anything like that or shuto in Japan. The ring was just the way to have fights because it demarks the area in which you're fighting. The problem is, in any sport with wrestling, where people are going to be pushed against it, you need something that contains the action rather than just frames it. And the only way to make the ring safer in terms of wrestling is to tie the ropes together at more points, but every string down the center of the ropes makes it more like a cage. You're just obstructing people's views. So it's a deeply sort of flawed way of doing things, and finally some guy just gave up and started telling me it was a cultural thing, and I was like, well, fine, if you want to have it as a cultural thing, say that. Don't try and argue for all the ways that it works practically, because it doesn't. It fundamentally fails in its one job of containing the action. The one that people always, like, anytime you say something bad about the ring, people go, well, I think you'll find Jake Ellenberger caught his toe in the in between the fence and the cage, or whatever it was. And you're like, just give me 3 more examples of that, because I can give you 10 from the most recent Rizin card, even only from the main card, that are just constantly getting in the way of the action. People are like, oh, it stops stalling, but you have to restart every 10 seconds because guys get caught in the ropes or go through the ropes, and they don't stop the clock when they do. You're just giving more time over to fannying about than time to sort things out from the clinch. I think the Perspex wall thing is probably, I mean, I've heard a few people suggest it, but I think it's quite difficult, because if you get it absolutely clear, you're going to have real problems with dudes having their, with their ring craft, and you might have dudes just running straight back into it, not realizing it's there. If you go translucent, then there's no real point in having a big wall. You might as well just have a translucent fence. It's interesting. There's got to be some better way. It's like the gloves. They were saying in like 2007, oh, we're going to fix the gloves. And they never ever did. But the gloves is an annoying one because there are actually better gloves out there. The Rizin gloves are better. Bellator's gloves are better. The UFC just insist on using these shit gloves. Though the Rizin gloves are ugly. The fucking Hulk hands. Yeah, I don't know if there's an answer for it yet. But then I've always been saying there's got to be an answer for cage size. Like, there's no point having the flyweights run around in a 30-foot ring. 30-foot cage or whatever. Just get something on rails or something like that. You can, or just have like alternate fences that you can pop in easily. Bellator, actually, fair play to Bellator for their forward thinking. They have their mat that they use for the kickboxing ring, and then they remove the ring from on top of the mat and just plonk the cage down on top of it. Which, if you could find a way of doing that quickly, it would make for entertaining crossover events. But at present, there's no answer, and no one's willing to invest in it, and the people who do invest in it tend to be like nutters like Yama and Karate Combat, where their event is just going to tank after 2 episodes anyway, or 2 shows anyway. Anyway, cheers, Savaloy Joe. Actually, before we wrap up this episode, I want to talk about another event that I watched this weekend, which I really enjoyed. It was Absolute Championship Burkut 86, ACB 86. And yeah, it had a number of really fun fights on. Had 3 title fights on. One of the ones that I was tuning in for was Batraz Agneyev versus, and you're about to discover the reason that I don't cover Russian events very often, Dovletzan Yagshimuradov. I think I did that pretty well, actually. But yeah, this was one that was cancelled back in 2017, and if you've been keeping up with my Fight Primer stuff, I did a prospect watch on Batraz Agneyev because he was such an interesting character. He's 4-0, but his most recent victory was just such a step up in competition. Took on Thiago Silva of UFC fame. Thiago Silva, a guy with 25 fights, and left the UFC as a good light heavyweight. I think he was still top 15 or something like that. He left because he went mental and took a gun into a jiu-jitsu gym to confront Pavle Popovich for banging his wife or something like that. And Max Nunez was another one, a good Swedish fighter who had a 17-3 record when he met Agneyev, and Agneyev just ran through him. The thing about Agneyev is that he came in as like a wrestler, but he's a wrestle banger. He found out very early that he has a wicked right hand, and he can just get up from underneath people a lot of the time. The stand-ups he's hitting are not the most technical, but he just does them. It's Derek Lewis-esque. But this fight was really interesting, because the one thing that I was saying about him in the Silva fight was that he has brilliant ring pressure and ring presence. You know, he put Silva on the fence very, very early and just kept him there for the whole time. But he wasn't doing much for a lot of the time, and then he'd throw a right hand and it would hit Silva and Silva would stumble, or he'd throw like 4 punches and finally hurt Silva. But the strikes were few and far between. He was frustratingly inactive, even though he had this beautiful cage control. And against Yagshimurov, or Yagshi, as we'll be calling him now, against Yagshi, he came out and controlled the cage again perfectly, but threw very, very few strikes. In fact, he threw almost nothing. And then, come the second round, Yagshimurov, he dwarfs, to be honest. Yagshimurov looks much smaller than him. Just throws a front kick right up the centre, stuns him. Agneyev jumps in to throw the right hand with his elbow really, really high, as he always does, and Yagshi takes him down. And then from there he moves to his back and gets the choke. It was gorgeous. But the front snap kick to the face is a tricky thing to do. I mean, it's something that the guy has to either be standing still or be far enough out and predictably walking forward that he's going to come right onto the end of your range. You know, it's not something you can do effectively when the guy's pressuring you properly and actually threatening to attack you every time he steps forward. And it's not something you can do with the guys consciously moving in and out. Vitor Belfort versus Anderson Silva was the first one in the UFC. I mean, Machida landed one on Franklin before that, but the first one in the UFC was because they stood still and stared at each other, and Silva just snapped it up in his face. And the other famous one in a similar situation to this was Travis Brown versus Overeem, because Overeem was just plodding forward predictably, and he wasn't the pressure wasn't there. He wasn't like, I'm going to get in on you soon. He was just sort of following Travis Brown across the cage, and Travis Brown threw about 4 and until one landed. You don't really see it very much on the back foot, to the face at least. But yeah, it was beautiful. So keep your eye on Yagshimurov. He might just continue to be sort of an okay guy, but he'd been waiting on this fight a little while. In fact, he'd been cancelled twice, in 2017 and earlier this year. And Agneyev was the big favourite, and he pulled it off. So very impressive. Agneyev, the thing was that he's been training as a fighter for a long time. He hasn't fought very often. Various injuries and things have kept him out of action. And he has been in this much longer than the 4-1 record says that he has been, or suggests that he has been. The problem is that I'm worried he's not learning enough between fights. And this fight really showed that he didn't bring anything new, and the same stuff that he was using against Thiago Silva just wasn't working here. Thiago Silva definitely went into a panic when he was put on the back foot, and it just didn't happen here. The main event was Yusuf Raisov, sorry. I don't even know why I'm bothering to correct myself, because I'm going to get it wrong, even if I try and think I get it right. Versus Marat Balayev, and that was for the featherweight title. They were unifying their featherweight belts. The two had fought once before already, and Balayev had won. And this time it was just Raisov ended up in like a dogfight position, took the back, got the choke. Wasn't a particularly right, you wouldn't write home about the fight. There was nothing really special in it. But the co-main event was Askar Askarov, great name, versus Razul. Isn't that a Lovecraftian villain? Razul Albashaknov. And basically, this lad is a flyweight too, so this was their flyweight title. And immediately after, I'd watched this just after watching Rizin, and said, oh my god, there's no one for Kyoji to fight. But this guy'd be interesting. I mean, he's definitely not in Kyoji's league on the feet, but he's fun on the floor. He got taken down into guard for most of the first round. He was attacking with a Kimura from half guard really well for the most of the first round. And then he got back into guard, and he's using grapevines. You don't see grapevines. You're seeing them more in MMA now, especially with the influence of people like Neil Melanson, but you don't really see them as much as you could. A grapevine is where you put your foot inside their foot and you stretch it out. You've seen it before hundreds of times, I'm sure. But Guys now use it to put in the butterfly hooks. If you watched Bobby Whittaker versus Yoel Romero, he gets taken down into closed guard, but he keeps double underhooks with his arms, and then he grapevines Yoel Romero out so that he's stretched out, and then he puts in his butterfly hooks and lifts him up and gets back to his feet with double underhooks. So you're turning a disadvantageous position on the ground into an advantageous position on the feet in the clinch. But that fight is just brilliant. Bobby Whittaker had so many cool ways to get up and sort of scramble up and out without sort of confronting Yoel in his strongest areas. But Askarov was using he had collar, tie, and the wrist with the guy postured down on him, on his chest, from closed guard. And he stretches, on the wrist side, he stretches out the grapevine and then tries to swing it all the way up and over for a triangle. It was a really nice little entrance, and it was the sort of thing that Neil Melanson has dozens of in his Triangles book, which is well worth a buy. Might be my favourite book of all time, instructional. Actually, the one I was recommending this week was Matt Lindland's book. Really underrated. Dirty Boxing. Very little of it is actually dirty boxing. It's just one of the best wrestling books for MMA that you'll see. But Askarov got top position with like half a minute to go in the first round, and he immediately moved into mount, and that was when the round ended. And you thought, oh, this guy's pretty good if he gets on top. And then in the second round, he got on top, and Razul came up on a takedown attempt and got choked. Guillotine choke. Just under 2 minutes of the second round. So yeah, I was impressed by this lad. I'm going to go back and watch his other fights. It was pleasing that when I clicked on his record, he had a twister submission very recently. I was like, oh, I can't wait to watch that. But yeah, not a bad event, I thought. ACB. I only really watched the main card, but 3 title fights, always good. I mean, obviously they're sort of regional guys, but fun stuff nonetheless. And Yagshi beating Agnev was definitely worth noting this week. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here, and we'll come back on Wednesday, Thursday for UFC 224 and Bellator 199 previews. If you have a question to send to the podcast, I'm getting through them at a rate of knots now. fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com. If you want to hear the Patreon episodes or just support the podcast generally, and you don't give a shit about the history episodes, join the Patreon. If you are a Patreon boy, the Ken Shamrock Tito Ortiz episode has just gone up recently. It was really good fun writing that one, but I did read a lot of MMA biographies, and they are hard work. Especially the ones that are masked as autobiographies. And then on the subject of MMA biographies, mine's a lot better than all the ones that I had to read this week. So buy Notorious, keep an eye on the Fight Primer, where I update all the things I'm doing for everywhere else. And I'll catch you later in the week. Black Explosive, Master of the 52, and the Bin Man Caught These Hands t-shirts coming soon.